speaking of things that are wrong and unfair, bad calls in the NFL, there were a few that were dominating the discussion yesterday. Number one, the delay of game, or more accurately, lack thereof, on the play that preceded the 66-yard record and game-winning field goal by the Baltimore Ravens. Then the two things that happened in very close proximity, the failure to flag the 49ers for the illegal hit to the head and neck area of Devontae Adams. And I know, and Mike Golick explained it today very passionately, and I understand that, it's a football play, and what are you supposed to do? But anytime the helmet hits the head or neck area of a defenseless receiver, it's a foul. And that's the way it is now. Whether you wanted to do it or not, that's the way it is. And then the decision to let Adams back into the game so quickly, those were the things that were drawing the attention. And now, on top of that, Charean, we've got the last play of the Chargers-Chiefs game, the Hail Mary. Pretty clear evidence, as supported by former NFL referee and now Sunday Night Football rules analyst Terry McCauley. Hail Mary, interference, uncalled. Shades of the Fail Mary when Golden Tate shoved a Packer out of the way to catch the ball. Here are Chargers daring the officials to throw the flag. Only minutes after they threw an interference penalty on a fourth down that looked ticky-tack at best, the guy's hugging Tyreek Hill, hugging him, and pushing him away from the ball. There is no scenario where this is not a foul for defensive pass interference, says Terry McCauley. What is the world coming to where something that blatant is not called?
And there were two of them on that play, Mike. Travis Kelce got knocked down too by Gilman, and that should have been called. Either one of those could have been called, and the Chargers would have had a hard argument to make that it wasn't pass interference. Their only explanation could have been that we don't throw the flag on a Hail Mary play, but that's not true. If it's interference on one play, it's interference on another play. Interference is interference regardless of when it happens. The Chiefs should have gotten the ball there at the 1 or 2 yard line. There's no question about that. Had another play, score a touchdown, kick the extra point, and they win that game. So the Chargers got very lucky that they didn't call it, but that's probably why they interfered, Mike, thinking that the officials weren't going to call it in that situation. You know what? They were right. They got away with it.
Advantage Chargers, because they did it and they got away with it, and maybe the fact that somebody threw a flag for defensive pass interference just a few minutes earlier, which goes against what we are led to believe happens in crunch time of a game. The flag goes deeper in the pocket, especially for pass interference. And I'm not sure it even was defensive pass interference. And I still think it was questionable at best that we didn't see a quick replay of that as it happened. They just kind of moved along. I agree with you. It should have been interference. And I'm reminded, Charean, of the year 2019 when the NFL allowed replay review of defensive and offensive pass interference calls and non-calls. They abandoned that after one season. But as they were explaining what was and wasn't going to be allowed, remember there was a question as to whether or not it would be available for plays under certain circumstances, because they didn't want this kind of micromanagement of Hail Mary throws, because everybody knows in a Hail Mary setting certain things that aren't allowed normally are allowed here, and it's kind of know it when you see it. Even under that standard, though, this is still pass interference. This is no different than what Golden Tate did 9 years ago when he shoved a Packer out of the way, and caught the ball in the end zone for the victory for the Seattle Seahawks and ended the lockout of the officials.
Yeah, the Hail Mary, we all remember it, Mike, anybody who watched that game, and that's why the officials came back, because it was such a blatant pass interference, and I don't think this is any different than that. Now, I'll say, watching it live, I was trying to get on and write my story and all those sorts of things. I didn't really pay much attention to it, and then when Terry McCauley started tweeting, I went back and watched it. I'm like, yeah, that's definitely pass interference. They didn't call it. I wasn't surprised they didn't call it after seeing that, but it should have been called.
The game broadcast has so much influence over the extent to which it becomes a thing. I am going to go and watch the end of that game on the NFL's Game Pass feature and see how many more looks they gave at it. Did they say, oh, whoa, look at that, a little pushing and shoving in the end zone, or did you just end and fire the confetti and shake hands and the
move on?
The game just dissolves to the 425 or 405 game. I had another thought that escaped me in that moment. it'll come back to me here eventually if I filibuster long enough, or maybe it won't. Regardless, it won't. So I'm going to act like none of that just happened. You can't get the last 20 seconds of your life back or this most recent 5. Let's move on to here's what I want to say generally, though. And I wrote about it today, talked about it this morning. This is something the NFL desperately needs, and they need it now. They've needed it for a while. And here's how the progression has gone of NFL VP of officiating or senior VP of officiating or whatever title they use, the guy in charge of the officiating who is supposedly or ideally the public face and voice of the NFL's officiating decisions, and in my view, the most important employee of the league office during football season, even more important than the commissioner, who is just a ceremonial figurehead, but for matters of discipline on or off the field. The day in and day out communication to media, to teams, etc., that falls to the VP of officiating. When it was Mike Pereira, he was great. We saw him on NFL Network all the time. He did media all the time. He did videos all the time, explaining tough decisions, controversial calls, and admitting what he needed to admit when he needed to admit it. Then it was
Dean
I can't
Blandino,
remember.
Right?
It was Carl Johnson in between. Remember Carl?
Oh, it was Carl. That's right.
Carl was blinking, you missed it, and Carl was there, and now he's been back on a crew ever since then. He never embraced the public side of it. That was not his skill set. Then comes Blandino. Clearly his skill set to be a public-facing ambassador, ombudsman, whatever long words you want to use. He was very good at explaining and getting people to buy in and getting people to understand how these calls are made. And it's such a critical function because the minute you have bad calls and no transparency, that's when the tinfoil hat crowd comes out and thinks something is rigged. When you're quiet about it, when you're hiding the truth, when you're not even dealing with the truth, when you bury your head in the sand, that's when the people who are inclined to say that outcomes are rigged, and they're not. But we can't afford to have people thinking that they are. I don't want that. Charean, you don't want that. Nobody wants that, because when people start thinking it's rigged, they opt out. They're done. I'm done. My team's screwed all the time. I'm done. I'm going to do something else on my Sunday afternoons. I don't care about this anymore. So I think they need somebody. Al Riveron was not suited for that part of the job either. Not suited for replay review either. It's one of the reasons why he's no longer there, frankly. Walt Anderson, they're not even trying to put him out for anyone to speak. You can't just issue a statement about why Devontae Adams went back in the game. You can't have a pool report where Scott Novak recites the talking points for how the mechanics work when there's a potential delay of game. You need somebody with credibility, authority, experience, and who knows how to speak in a way that will persuade people to understand that any mistakes made are mistakes that are honest and legitimate mistakes. We don't want to have any, but when they happen, here's why. Sometimes it's a close call. Sometimes it can go either way. You need to do that to keep people from thinking it's rigged.
Well, and Mike, you've talked a lot about gambling coming into the game and how important it is to have that transparency, and it becomes more important by the year as the NFL embraces gambling. You've got to address these things, and those were two huge calls at the end of games that cost teams games because the officials didn't make the correct calls. And we're probably going to hear, I would expect, I'll be stunned if we hear anything from the NFL about this. They want it to go away. This is not going away quickly because it influenced 2 games this week.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great and powerful Oz has spoken. That's the message from the NFL. And I remember what I was going to say earlier when I filibustered my way through about 30 seconds trying to remember it. If that game, Chargers-Chiefs, had been Thursday night, Sunday night, Monday night, I guarantee you it would have been a much bigger deal. Yeah. Because when you have those standalone games and everybody reacts after and everybody's watching, and maybe we do get a few more replays served up, or there's not like a bunch of other stuff happening, that one game gets tucked into the 9 total games that were occurring at 1 o'clock Eastern time. That's something the league should be happy about. If that had been last night's game that ended that way, it would have been a much bigger deal, and it's the number one thing we would have been talking about all day long. The Chiefs got screwed out of an opportunity to have first and goal from the 1 because Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce both got mugged at the goal line.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.